Hi, everyone. Welcome. First of all, thank you so much for your patience and our sincere apologies for the technical difficulties. In this new world, we're so heavily reliant on technology, sometimes things are going to go wrong. So huge shout out to the media production team for scrambling and coming up with a quick workaround, and thank you all for your patience and for joining. So I'm Jen Brannigan, and welcome finally to Talk to the Brand Live. Talk to the Brand is a podcast all about matters of brand. Employer brand, that is. I'm your host, Jen Brannigan. I started my career in human resources at PricewaterhouseCoopers and GE, and then pivoted to marketing at NBC Universal, where I worked with some of the world's largest advertisers. I joined LinkedIn 9 years ago to build out our talent brand business, and I now lead a global team of talent brand and content marketing consultants. In my spare time, I'm also an avid runner, tennis player, and reader, and I live in Chicago with my husband and 3 kids. And thankfully, speaking of technical difficulties, the 3 kids are well out of Dodge for this episode. So let's talk about Talk to the Brand. I'd like to share a little bit about why I started this podcast. As a former HR professional turned marketer, I've always been obsessed with the concept of applying traditional branding and marketing strategies to TA and employee engagement. Understanding your target audience, what matters to them, how they perceive you, how you communicate to them in an authentic, differentiated voice, and how you win your share. As I like to say, given how social and connected the world has become, every company has an employer brand, whether they like it or not, whether they built it or not, whether they're investing in it or not. I speak with organizations frequently who understand that talent is the way they win, and they know that today's workforce cares about culture, purpose, mission, not just a job. Changing an employer is one of those emotional, visceral decisions that anyone can make. And one believing that they are going to be able to thrive in a new environment, in a new culture, is a huge component of that decision. So these organizations all understand they need to have an ironclad branding strategy, but many just don't know how to deliver it or where to get started. And that's what Talk to the Brand is all about. Sharing success stories, providing tools, roadmaps, and even just some sage advice from EB practitioners, CHROs, CMOs, and agencies on how they've built brands, created marketing strategies, overcome obstacles, and ultimately really carved a path in this space. Stories that you, our audience, can take back to your businesses and apply in your work. So Talk to the Brand was originally conceptualized before the world flipped on its head with COVID-19. We had a few great shoots we were ready to shoot this spring, and we were getting ready to go and thought, is this still relevant? Should we still go live? It only took me about 3 seconds to come to the conclusion that this new world we're living in doesn't diminish the importance of employer brand at all. Frankly, it actually amplifies the importance of employer branding in all of the underlying fundamentals. Understanding what you stand for, your company culture, how you treat your employees, authenticity, and above all else, communication. As I've been engaging with companies over the last few weeks, the common theme of the challenges I've been hearing is what I categorize in the bucket of paralysis. What do I do right now? What do I say? And how do I say it? Maybe it's a fear of coming across tone deaf. Maybe it's a concern about how you communicate with talent about your culture while you're cutting costs, furloughing, laying people off. Or maybe it's just that you or your executive team are unclear about what you should be doing right now if hiring's on pause. Well, that's what we're here to talk about today. And don't forget, this is an interactive session, and so please use the chat function to submit your questions, and we'll definitely address them during the course of this broadcast. So let's get into it. I am so excited to introduce my guest today, esteemed employer brand consultant, Emily Firth. Emily she has an incredible track record of transforming top global brands like Dove and Absolute Vodka. And before starting her own consultancy, she was the global head of employer branding at Booking.com, where she recently won Best Employer Brand Award for companies with over 10K employees. Emily is also a proud working mother and a vocal advocate for equality and inclusion in the world as well as the workplace, which are 2 causes that really resonate with me. She's also one of the most knowledgeable and thoughtful leaders in this space, and I'm so thrilled to have her on Talk to the Brand. Welcome, Emily.
Thank you, Jen, and what a lovely introduction. I'm so glad to be having this conversation. It's such a crazy time, but also a time for some big conversations about employer branding.
Absolutely. So to start off, I gave a brief bio, but can you tell us a little bit about your path? How did you end up in employer branding and where did your passion develop?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to. I think, like you, I did a bit of a pivot. So, as you said, I was working for some pretty big brands on the agency side, more from the master brand and consumer marketing perspective, which I absolutely loved. And I worked with some incredible brands and told some great stories for them. But the agency world is not super known for being the most amazing culture beyond kind of great table tennis tables and happy hours. So I think as I got a bit older, I really realized I was looking for something more from a workplace culture. I had a pretty bad burnout, actually, which, maybe some of you can relate to in this 24-hour working world we find ourselves in now. And that really helped me refocus and say, you know what, I want to apply the marketing and branding skills that I have to telling more human stories and actually helping to shape culture from the inside of companies. So yeah, I sort of fell into it, I guess, but have been here for the last 4 or 5 years now and wouldn't look back. I definitely don't miss marketing, shoes and vodka. I love what I'm doing.
Wonderful. So you and I, while we almost had the flip-flop of paths, we both ended up in a very similar place.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's the best place to be, I think. It's a fantastic area to work in.
And so well needed, not just during these times, but every day. So diving in, before we get into the formal questions, I like to do in my podcast a little bit of an icebreaker, a way to warm up the audience, warm you up, and for the audience to get to know you a little bit better. And given we are in this sort of strange quarantine state, I figured I would focus the questions there. You ready?
I'm ready, Jen. Hit me.
All right, so let's go. First of all, where are you quarantining?
I'm in Amsterdam, although I'm a Brit, as you can probably tell from my accent. So yeah, here in the Netherlands, I usually have more stuff on my shelves, but we've been using the opportunity for DIY like everyone else. So
Nice.
use the bare bones.
Nice. Last show you binged on?
I am watching The Last Dance on Netflix, which is all about the Chicago Bulls and Michael Jordan, which if you haven't watched it and are an employer brand nerd like me, I highly recommend it. So there are actually a lot of synergies between The Last Dance and employer branding. MBA, an interesting employer, lots of stuff about equity and pay and relationship between big bosses and the people, on the floor doing the hard work. So you can find employer brand in everything, but it's a great.
Find it everywhere. I love it. Well, as a Chicagoan myself, I am a big fan of the Bulls, and so I cannot wait to watch that. Have you baked anything interesting? There's this whole subculture of sourdough baking. Have you got into that?
My friend dropped me around a sourdough pre-prepared. All I had to do was put it in the oven and then put it on Instagram. So that was fantastic. I'm a horrible baker. I refuse to try anything from scratch. It's just always a disaster.
But you still get the photo, and if the photo's there, that's all that counts, right?
Absolutely. All about authenticity.
All right. Well, how about a favorite quarantine meal to cook?
Comfort food. I'm one of those people that bought pasta as soon as this hit. So I didn't hoard it though. I'm buying my rations.
What's the first thing you'll do once the world opens back up?
That is a great question. See family and friends is probably what I should say, but I really desperately need a haircut. So.
Hair salon is number one on mine.
I mean, priorities, right?
That's right. And any guilty pleasures you've been indulging in?
Probably too much time online, to be totally honest, which is a guilty pleasure, but also something I need to watch. So yeah, enjoy this stream and then log off, everyone.
That's right. And then finally, to end on a positive note, and because I'm a big believer in finding the best in every situation, any unexpected silver linings?
Time with my family and people taking the employer brand conversations seriously, which we're going to get into.
Perfect. Well, that's a great segue. Let's get into it. Thanks so much for indulging me there.
A pleasure.
So first off, let's dive into the importance of employer brand right now during these times. There's been a lot of press lately about how companies are treating their employees. And in fact, as you've stated, the way you treat your employees today is front page news. Is employer brand becoming the company brand during these times when how you treat your employees is so critical?
I think that's a great question, Jen. And I think a lot of people have been having this discussion about, is your employer brand your brand? Are they merging? I think it's less about thinking about whether your different brand silos are coming together. I think inevitably they are and they will, but that's not because of any moving of those silos per se. I think it's just that communication is becoming more transparent. And I'll tell you a little bit what I mean by that. I think we've always imagined this invisible line between what we see inside a company and then what's happening outside a company and the front that a company puts on for the world. And I think those lines are just becoming eroded, partly because of the situation we're in, but there were already trends towards this anyway, with employees feeling more comfortable to organize themselves and stand up against employers or speak out against unfair treatment, with the open letter that is a continual open book. People write open letters, expecting them to get leaked now. So I think it's more that companies and the world inside them is becoming more transparent for everyone to see. And that's everything from supply chains to the way their employees are treated. So I don't think it's necessarily a new trend. It's just suddenly become amplified because the stakes are so much higher.
Absolutely. And how is how you treat your employees really showing up these days?
Well, I think it's becoming everything. So when you start to see this transparency in the supply line, you think about things that people once deemed essential. We talk about customer centricity, but actually customers are saying, I'd rather you also think about your employees than just think about putting me first. When we talk about customer obsession, your customer now has a conscience, and they don't want to think about the fact that something being very convenient for them is actually putting someone else's health or life or livelihood at risk and the well-being of their families. So because those stakes are now upped, something which would have been, unfortunate is now a matter of life or death. So because of that stake raising, people are thinking more about where their products are coming from and the impact of the choices they're making.
Yeah. And with that happening, what should employer branders be thinking about? We talk a lot about communication and having a voice during this time. How does that tie in?
I think it's a really difficult time for employer brand marketeers because they're used to showing their company on a good day. And this is their company on potentially, a really bad day in really difficult circumstances, navigating a situation they've never been in before. But actually, I think that also provides an opportunity to say to your leadership, we're going to show our more authentic side. We are going to show what we look like on not our best day and not our finest moment, but we're going to show how we acted in that situation. And actually, the way that you act is much more important than what you say. So the companies that are really showing up are ones that are taking action. And then, yes, of course, talking about that action, but in a way that's humble, that says that we're doing everything we can, that we're not perfect, that we're navigating this situation like everyone else. And I think actually for candidates and potential candidates, they're actually sympathetic to that. We are used to seeing the glossy face of an organization, but equally we respect an organization that's honest enough to say, these are the steps we're taking. We can do more. We're trying to do more. We need to do more.
Yeah. Yeah. And what do you see as some of the dangers of not doing that, of actually going quiet because you might not know what to share right now?
Well, I guess let's start about thinking about the way digital marketing works. You build a community. That community is ready and willing to hear what you have to say. If you go dark on that community, you're basically saying, we've got nothing to say to you. We only had things to say to you when it was easy, when things were going well. And actually, that's not how a dialogue works. That's not how communities work. Communities want to see that you're showing up. So I think if you go dark, it actually creates a narrative in its place. People say, okay, well, they're either not doing anything or what they're doing is so bad, they're afraid to speak up. So I think those narratives are being formed in people's minds, whether or not your front page news for, something being leaked. It could be at that end of the extreme, or it could be, much more on the sort of lower end of the spectrum, but still equally important. It could be that the candidates and potential candidates that you've started engaging with now think, okay, well, the company's gone quiet, so they must be hiding something. And that just breaks that trust and breaks that relationship that you've built over time, and also says that you don't understand how an open and transparent communication works.
That's right. And you and I have spoken a lot about what might be a driving force behind this is short-termism. Like, oh, this will change. We'll get through this. Let's just ride this out and see how things are going to be. But that might not necessarily be the case. And that's not how talent is thinking, is it?
No, absolutely. I mean, bear in mind, you have some of the most interesting, talented individuals back on the market as a result of companies having to make layoffs, companies who, have attracted some of the best talent from across the world that other companies haven't even had a look in on. So actually, the talent marketplace is super interesting right now. Even if you're not looking to hire at this very moment, you want to start building those narratives now with the type of talent that you've always said we've struggled to attract, or we've never been able to have those dialogues because they've been snapped up by the big tech companies or by the big employers. Now's your chance as a small challenger brand to start building those narratives and start saying, we're not in the same financial position as them. We may be struggling as well, but actually we do care about our people and we offer something different. And I think candidate and talent are going to be looking for something different. They are going to be looking for that transparency from their leadership. If they've been laid off by a big brand in a way that, really burned them and made them feel not great about that experience, they'll be looking for something different in their new employer. So actually, as a challenger brand, you have more of an opportunity than you've ever had to have some genuine conversations and say, we offer something different. And it might not be the best pay packet, but we offer care and connection and community and things that, job seekers are seeking instead.
Yeah. So brands really do have an opportunity here to actually be opportunistic. And in places where they may have been losing before, it's by having that authentic message around what they can offer that they're going to be building the longer term relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's opportunistic, I guess, has been seen as a very dirty word in terms of branding and employer branding. But I don't think it has to be. If you're being opportunistic to provide opportunities to people that are seeking jobs, that's not negative opportunism. I think if you're being opportunistic in a way that you are looking to offer something different or looking to be seen in a way that you haven't had the opportunity to be seen before for the very strong and real and valued culture that you actually have, I don't think there's negativity in that opportunism. And I think, we're very worried, and you talked a bit about paralysis and, the sense of doing the wrong thing and therefore feeling stuck and not doing anything at all. And actually, I think the reality is that people thought, okay, well, if we freeze for a month, this might all go back to normal, quote unquote, and we can continue our content plan and strategy that we had in place that was all very pre-organized, pre-approved, planned months in advance and pre-shot. Now, we're not going to go back to that reality anytime soon. And I think it's becoming increasingly obvious we are going to face things like recession. Companies are going to continue to struggle. Hiring is going to become potentially less of a big priority. And if you are hiring, you're going to want to know that you've got the right people, because it's not going to be as, easy to churn talent. You might have to promise them a lot to get them back on board. So I just think that there's no point in being stuck in paralysis. I think take tentative steps to speak up, be humble, think about what you can say that's positive. Think about what your brand values are, what your EVP was in the good times. Those things shouldn't change. If you believed in all of those things fundamentally, and if they were based on truth and authentic reality about working for your company, you should still be able to tell that story and find those stories. It's just the exact content might have changed and the exact story might have changed. And actually, if you talk about resilience, if you talk about innovation, if you talk about caring about people, if you can't show that now in crisis in some way, then you never potentially really valued those things in the first place.
Absolutely. And I think that messaging and that communication and packaging of that, not only will it impact talent communities that you're engaging with externally, but your internal talent community as well, your employees and how engaged they are as you go through this crisis, because retaining them, motivating them is more important now than ever, frankly.
Absolutely. And people are scared. They're scared about losing their jobs. They are scared for their families. They're scared about economic recession. What more important time to engage with your current talent force? And of course, you'll also have seen that if you have had to let people go, there's a real reassurance and rebuilding job to do there with your current talent. I think employer branding has always been internal and external combined. there's this perception that you're doing TA and that's external, but the reality is a lot of your followers will be your current employees. A lot of the people viewing your content inside or outside will be your current employees. And actually what your talent brand does is give you a platform to hero those people, to thank them publicly, to help build their profile and build their brand, which will be important to them in the future, especially if they're worried about security. So you're actually doing a very important job in engaging your internal talent as well. And showing them those stories of resilience, and living your values from inside the organization as well will really help to boost morale and really help to make them see actually both the company is doing something for me, but equally our community is supporting each other. And I think that's the mistake a lot of people make as well, is thinking that all employer branding initiatives have to be about what the company is doing for employees. I think there's also a way to step back as employers and facilitate the communities that already exist. You know, how are you supporting your ERGs? Are you going to them and saying, what does this community that you represent need more of? And how can we as employers help, even if it's stepping back, even if it's not budgetary, even if it's just listening, providing direction, providing resources, having conversations that need to be had. These things don't have to cost money, but actually those actions will be talked about. And I've also, you know, I think I've written about this previously, but I do believe that employee resource groups will become naturally your most powerful brand advocates as time goes on, because part of the reason you join an employer is to join a community. And every community has different needs right now, whether that's a parent community, whether it's a community of BAME employees who are being disproportionately affected by this crisis. Each community will have different needs. And actually, when you join an employer, part of your support network is that community that you join. It's not just expecting things to be top down. So I think if you can tap into that as an employer and make sure that you're telling those stories that matter, but also actually taking action where it matters, you will find that your employer brand really starts to shine through, and you get natural advocacy from those groups as well.
Absolutely. It becomes an inside out thing, right? Basically, you have your own set of ambassadors because of the investment that you've made in them, listening to them, seeing how this crisis has impacted that particular affinity group, and just listening. I think that's important.
If you think about it as a long-term relationship, and you think about how some of the strongest marriages are based on having been through something together, this actually is an opportunity to emerge stronger as a culture and a community. And that doesn't mean you might not lose people along the way. It doesn't mean that you might find it harder to say that everything's rosy. It does mean that people will trust you more for being authentic and for having those communications more openly. And that's both with candidates, potential candidates, and your employees.
Brilliant. I mean, so based on this discussion alone, there's so much that employer brand practitioners can be doing right now for their internal employees to have this continuous communication with the talent marketplace. Yet it feels like this crisis has caused a bit of a sink or swim moment for employer branding. A lot of companies who tie the function specifically to pipelining and hiring might be putting these teams on ice or potentially even letting them go, or frankly, not sure what to do with them if they're not sure what they should be communicating right now. How do you think about this? And what advice would you give to employer brand teams on how they can make an impact and how they can get their organizations to deeply engage right now and drive this long-lasting impact?
I'm so glad you asked that question, Jen. It's something I've written about quite recently as well, and I'm happy to share with this community the article that I posted recently on my LinkedIn about this. I believe this is not time to put your employer brand teams on ice. Having worked with several employer brand teams, both as a consultant and also with an excellent team when I was internal, I think you find some of the most resourceful, scrappy talent. They are so used to doing stuff with nothing, with no resources, with no brief, with their function, very loosely defined, constantly having to prove their ROI. You have people who have backgrounds across HR, recruitment, marketing, digital content creation. These are very hybrid people with hybrid skills who are very used to navigating ambiguity. They're some of your most valuable resources right now, because trust me, there are other people in your company who are much more used to having a tight brief and a clear remit. These guys are not. If any employer brand team I've worked with has said they struggle with the clarity of what they're meant to be doing. So if these teams operate in ambiguity, they're the ones that are going to be able to find the gaps. They're the ones who are going to be able to go out and write their own brief. And what I would say to anyone who is being put on ice right now, or who's in danger of being put on ice, is don't wait to be told what your brief is. Don't wait to be told where you can add value. Culture, if it's anything, does not belong to any one department and does not belong to any one individual. Culture is everything that runs through your company, and very often it's not set from top down. You have the amazing advantage of being super connected across the business, of having all of these different people who you speak to on a daily basis to get them to be your ambassadors, to connect with employees. And you have potentially the ear of the talent within your business in ways that, you know, an HR function finds it hard to do when they're also dealing with layoffs and the more functional aspects of getting people technically set up from for working from home, etc. So you have this advantage of having these real human connections across the business. Act like a journalist, leverage those connections, find a story that is worth telling. And those stories are not necessarily from the top of your organization. Often when I'm creating employer branding content, I find that the stories that resonate the most with talent are the ones that are from the center of the organization. They could be a community that's set up, you know, organically itself to support each other. It could be a group that is actively volunteering in the community and is trying to get others within the business to volunteer and give back. You know, those are the stories that really show your culture at its best. And those stories are not the ones that your leadership is focused on right now. They're focused on just getting the business to function and surviving. And that's fine, that's their job. But actually, you have an ear to the ground and you can surface those incredible stories and actually help to drive culture as well. It's not just about storytelling. If you find an initiative that's quite organic, that's worth talking about, it's probably also worth your company investing in and ramping up. You know, I've seen some incredible initiatives from, for example, I was looking at the work Chobani are doing, who are a yogurt and dairy company in the US. I don't know if they're known globally, but they're definitely worth checking out. And their founders talking about, you know, how people will really be, companies will be really be remembered for how they treat their employees, customers, and shareholders. And he makes the point of referencing employees first. And what I really love about what they're doing is they know that they're purpose-driven organization, which is all about getting nutritious food out to communities. And actually, they're leveraging that purpose through everything they're doing now. And they're finding it's helping to galvanize employees. So they've teamed up with Feed America. They're working with the governor of New York to make sure that low-income families are getting access to free or subsidized products from them. And actually, they've turned their Soho store into a distribution center and are using employee volunteers to staff that. Now, I don't know about you, Jen, but I think feeling helpless is one of the worst things in this crisis. Feeling like you're at home, feeling like you're not a key worker, you're someone who's frankly not a key worker, you know, working behind your laptop thinking, I wish I could be doing something more. And for an employer actually to offer an opportunity through their brand and through their, you know, that's lined up to their purpose and values for their employees to give back in whatever form that is incredibly powerful. It speaks to community, and nothing helps tie your community more together than actually having a common purpose and something that you can do instead of feeling helpless.
I love that. And it goes back to an answer that you provided earlier around your purpose should be the same. Your culture should be the same. It's just how it manifests itself in this landscape that we're operating in that might change right now. And so really capitalizing on that and making sure that you're leaning into that right now is more important than ever. And I love that Chobani example.
And they, you know, they are getting press and pickup from it, but that's not the original intent. I think if you find that you do something, people will talk about it, and your employees will take pride in what you're doing, however small, and they'll want to talk about it. And that helps to both bond your internal community and also have people lining up to be a part of what you stand for.
Brilliant. So I'd love to go back to something that you mentioned earlier. I think it's a really interesting concept, which is the concept of writing a brief. So you're suggesting employer branding professionals just sit down and say, here's where I can deliver value to the business right now, and proactively taking it to the leadership team.
I believe so. You talked about sink or swim earlier. I think now is the time to show our value and show that we have value beyond just short-term talent attraction and acquisition. And actually, talent attraction has always come from within. So we've often been, you know, in control or I guess responsible for a message that we're not in control of because we don't necessarily drive culture. Well, now's your opportunity. Start driving that culture, you know, and you also have time and opportunity to look at what your company's competitors are doing and say, actually, we're not doing well enough. We're not doing good enough. And this is going to come back and bite us longer term. I do think you have to write your own brief. I think keep it snappy. I think strive for insight. So your HR teams, if they're doing a good job, will also be doing people surveys right now, finding out what matters to people. You can also do your own research. You know, it doesn't have to be complicated. You are a networked individual. You're on LinkedIn. Ask how people are feeling. You know, use the communities you've built around candidate pipelines to say, what would you like to see about what we're doing? How can we provide you an inside look right now? Find a problem to solve, find an opportunity, explain how you want to solve it with an idea. And then I would say also get buy-in from across the organization. This is not a time to operate in a silo, and this is actually an opportunity for employer branding to move much closer to all of those other parts of the organization that actually shape the employer brand, but we don't always have access to. And I'm not just talking about approaching marketing. Approach your PR team, approach internal events, approach internal comms, approach everyone who you think has a stake in the game. And right now that should be everyone, realistically. Network your ideas, show how it can help support their aims and objectives. Everyone's in crisis mode, everyone's head down. People will welcome help if delivered in the right way, if offered in the right way. If you say, if we collectively pool our resources, I think we could do something really powerful. And this is what I think we could do. I'm offering up my team, I'm offering up my resources, I'm offering up my time to help with this. I think if you don't dare, you can't win.
That's right. And in essence, the function can become sort of a glue that brings all of these, you know, historically fragmented or siloed teams or functions together to ensure that the approach is coordinated, because that's what we need right now. We can't be saying different things out of different sides of our mouth, right? We need one consistent, unified voice.
Absolutely. And I think bear in mind for example, your company might be struggling with the fact it's trying to put out a very positive corporate brand image. However, employees are saying a different thing, even in extreme cases going to the press, etc. Internal engagement will help with that. Finding ways to engage people to feel like the company cares, to potentially suggest initiatives that can help build your employer brand and rebuild some trust within the organization will help with those aims. Even if that's not an overnight fix, I think offering to be a part of the solution when everyone is realizing that the beautiful brand image they built is falling apart at the seams is very important. And you'll have a different take and a different perspective for having engaged with those employees on the ground in a different way to your corporate function.
Yeah. So that's a great segue to a question that I have for you, which is a little bit of the elephant in the room, if you will. How should employer branding professionals and just even organizations more broadly be thinking about messaging and sharing news about culture when there is just inherently bad news? They're struggling because they're cutting costs, they're laying employees off, they're shutting down plants, whatever that may be. How do you balance that messaging?
Yeah, absolutely. I work with clients across the spectrum. So I'm working with clients who are in travel and hospitality, who are obviously in more challenging situations. The other end of the spectrum, I work with software companies who are doing, okay comparatively. So I think it very much depends where you're at. I think if you are on more of a positive role, it's easier to provide good news stories, of course. I think if you are really struggling, be aware that your candidates and your consumers are not unaware of the bigger picture. They're not unaware of everything that's going on in the world. I think you can be open and transparent about the struggles you're having, about the difficult decisions you're having to make. I think it's very important to explain why you're having to make those difficult decisions and what it means to the leadership to have to take those decisions, and also what you're going to do to support the employees who are outgoing and also the employees that remain. Those conversations still matter. That's still your employer brand. Even if it's not the sunniest message, it's a message of reassurance. And it's a message that says we are a transparent organization who are prepared to talk about the tough decisions that we're having to take, because we know you have a perception of those decisions, whether we speak up or not. So we want to help you understand that those decisions weren't taken lightly. I think, the example a lot of people have been sharing is the Airbnb CEO, Brian Chesky. I'm sure everything has not been perfect for the organization. And also that's an organization that's used to having a very strong brand, delivering great news. So I think this was, a very difficult step change for them. But what I liked about the way he handled the 25% of layoffs that, unfortunately they had to make at Airbnb was it was really done in a very authentic way, with some real emotion behind it in the communications, which I think is quite difficult for a leader to do, to be truly vulnerable and say, look, this was really, really hard. And also some transparency in the decision-making process, as well as reassurance for those employees to say, in this way, we are streamlining and future-proofing our business so that we can protect the jobs that remain. And I think a lot of people appreciated that candor from someone so senior and on, with such a high-profile reputation. For a company to have done that, I think speaks volumes about the respect that they have for their employees. And you see it being played back in the people who are both remaining at Airbnb and lamenting the fact that their colleagues are gone, but they now have a resource to share talent lists. They have a way to support their outgoing colleagues that's been provided by the company, which I think really helps people to still feel connected to the brand. And when you see people sharing layoff messages with #AirFam and talking about everything that was great about the experience and thanking their employer for, the opportunity, even whilst being asked to leave, that speaks to a very powerful culture. And their culture has always been about belonging, and he's keen to really emphasize that. So I think there's a lot that leaders can take and learn from that. What is it about your culture that you've previously stated? How do you now translate that to the bad times? And what does that look like in the bad times? How would a company that says they value transparency or innovation act in these times?
Yeah, that's a brilliant example. And the letter that came out was so human. It was so authentic and it was so real. And to your point, it said we need to future-proof this business so that we can come back stronger. And I think that if you truly do believe in your company culture, you understand that because you have such a deep relationship with that company that you want it to come back stronger.
Absolutely. I think the other thing that, is a difficult thing for leaders to do, but is incredibly powerful and speaks to a culture where leadership really care about their people, is where leaders have made sacrifices as well. I think it's incredibly important, even if it's not just a fiscal sacrifice, to show that you're putting yourself in your employees' shoes. And if they have to sacrifice, you're also prepared to sacrifice. Some of the most powerful brands emerging from this have actually been politicians and leaders. You look at someone like Jacinda Ardern taking a voluntary pay cut for her and her leadership team, when there wasn't necessarily a financial need to do so, but in solidarity with the millions of people across, New Zealand and the world, I guess, who are taking pay cuts at this moment. So I think showing as a leader that you are understanding of what people are going through, that you empathize, and that you're willing also to make personal sacrifices when asking others to sacrifice, it also really creates a very powerful message about your employer brand and who you are.
Brilliant. Thanks, Emily. So I'm actually going to pop over to the live stream right now to get some audience questions for you. So bear with me just a moment here.
Bring them on.
All right. So coming from Valentina, what would you suggest to companies which hadn't had an EVP before the emergency and now find themselves in need of creating one, validating it, and launching it in such uncertain times?
It's a really interesting question. I'm actually starting an EVP project remotely this week with a company who I guess is in a similar situation. What I think is interesting about creating an EVP now, and where you're lucky, Valentina, is you hadn't created something that potentially wasn't the right fit for where the company is going if you have to make a huge step change now as a result of the current crisis. This actually gives you an opportunity to really future-proof your EVP and really make sure that it will reflect the new world we live in. That doesn't mean that you should change your EVP if you've already created it. It means that you should hopefully have had enough flex to work with the current situation as well. But it does give you a unique opportunity that, really when you're at your most honest, authentic self as a company, to really get under the skin of what people think about the culture. And I think you'll find you get some much more honest answers from your employees than you would have done if you'd done it a month ago. So I think in a way, there's an opportunity there. I think there's definitely ways of doing this remotely. I think everyone is, within the new normal now, and sometimes people are more honest to a screen and to research being conducted that way than they are in a room. So you might also get some more authentic answers. But I would just say, speak to your leadership about how this is going to future-proof the business. It's going to help them come out even stronger as a result of this crisis, and really tap into what makes our culture strong, even in the hard times. So good luck. I hope that answered your question.
Thanks, Emily. So a great one coming in from Alvin. Employer branding is often one of the first work streams to experience a budget cut in a recessionary period. Any tips to convince the business to care more about this than ever, especially in trying times?
It's a really good question. I would say that any budget I've had in-house was not budget that was handed to me on a plate. I always had to hustle for it. I always had to come with an idea. And what I would say as well is companies are much more willing to invest if there's something on the table. If it's not a hypothetical, if you're asking for budget's sake, it becomes very difficult. If you have an idea of what to do with that budget and you know how it's going to impact what the business is currently struggling with, that makes it much more easy to sell. And when you start thinking about ROI, I think you need to have a very different conversation with your leadership about what ROI looks like for employer branding in these times. It's never been super easy to prove direct conversions for employer brand because it's such a long game. So now is actually a good chance to start saying, okay, what kinds of ROI could we be looking at? And remember that ROI is always most relevant based on the problem you're trying to solve. So if you're delivering return on investment, make sure it's actually return on investment for a problem that exists, or an area that you're trying to move forward, even if that is internal engagement for now. So I'd say map your ROI that you hope to achieve with the budget to an actual problem that your leadership is trying to solve.
Brilliant. All right, one coming in from Ashley. If your company hasn't had to make layoffs and are actually thriving right now, does it come across as braggadocious if we highlight how well we're able to take care of our people?
I love the word braggadocious. I think that should definitely be used in common parlance going forward. Look, I think with all communications, there's a sensitivity to the context in which you are launching those communications. I think the world needs positive news stories right now. I think people who've been laid off need to hear about companies that are hiring or in a stronger position to potentially be able to hire. That is a service to people who've been laid off and who are hunting for jobs. You know, they're looking for a stable rock to land on. So I don't think if handled in the right way, it comes across as braggadocious. I think there's a way to do it. I think there's a humility in saying we are so lucky to be in this position. We know that other companies and employers are not as lucky. And I also think if you're in a strong position, you should really be asking yourselves what you can give back. I think if all you can say, you know, when you're doing very well is that we took care of our people, what more could you be doing? If that's handled, could you be giving back in some other way? Could you be, you know, if your recruiters have downtime, could they be offering their services to support your candidate pipeline with tips and tricks for when they do go and seek employment? What else could you be offering of value, whether that's very fundamental, you know, what your product and your company could be offering per the yogurt example we talked about earlier, or, you know, something less material, something that is really about building community and giving back and supporting. So I think, no, if done in the right way, I think people need to hear good news stories. And I think if you are doing well, what more could you be doing to support the wider talent community?
That really makes a lot of sense. Thanks, Emily. So coming in from Israel, what data points or KPIs are most important right now to show the value and health of the employer branding efforts and investments?
I think it very much depends on your organization and their priorities. Sorry for the slight cop-out answer, but I would say there is no one size fits all in terms of metrics and ROI. As I said before, it comes down to what is important to your company right now. I would say we should be talking about community engagement, and I would say we also should be talking about working with PR at the moment. So how much noise about our company is positive versus negative? How much are people engaging with our brand and talking positively about our brand? And that includes our own employees. So I think there's a lot of social listening to do, a lot of caution there from an external perspective, and a lot of damage limitation potentially. If you're in that situation, actually your metrics could be around managing conversations and damage limitation and navigating very tricky news stories and things like that. So that would be one end of the spectrum. At the other end of the spectrum, internally, I think you can start to shift your metrics towards supporting internal engagement metrics. perceptions of how well your talent feels that you are handling the crisis, perception of how connected they feel to the community. I think it is time for some softer measures, as they are called, because this is a time for building and for reinforcing and supporting rather than growing or converting. So I think the ROI is completely shifted, and you need to be talking more about those long-term measures.
Brilliant. Well, I think that's about all we have time for right now, Emily. I just can't thank you enough for such a rich dialogue and all of the really thought-provoking and practical tips and advice that you gave to the audience today. I really enjoyed our conversation as always, and really appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thank you for the opportunity, Jen, and thank you everyone for such great questions. If there are more, you know where to find me on LinkedIn. Please ask me anything, anytime. I like to give back as well. So if you're needing advice and support, please come find me.
Awesome. Wishing you and your loved ones all the best during these times, Emily, and hope to speak with you again soon. So thanks again to all of you for joining, and thank you for your patience as we worked through the technical hiccups at the beginning. So my big takeaways from Emily that hopefully you guys can take back and apply to your day-to-day are, first of all, be proactive, take action, and write your own brief. This can be an incredibly galvanizing time for employer branding professionals and anyone in the talent acquisition space to really show what you can give back to the organization and what you can deliver to help work through these times and come out successfully. Secondly, when you're looking for your stories, find heroism in the everyday. Look in the center of your company. Look at your affinity groups. Understand where you can create employee brand ambassadors, and you can create real human stories of the impact that you're having on your employees right now and how you're treating them. Thirdly, remember the long game. Even if you're not hiring today, it's so important that you're having those conversations that are going to set you up for success later on with the talent that you've always had a hard time hiring. This is an opportunity, and not in a dirty way, to be opportunistic and to really develop deeper relationships with the talent that you know that you want in your organization for the long game. And then finally, can't sit paralyzed waiting for business as usual. This is the new normal, and it's going to go on for some time. We are going to be operating in ambiguity. So sitting waiting is not a strategy right now. It's time to take action. I hope all of you enjoyed this special Employer Branding in the Times of COVID episode of Talk to the Brand. We have 2 more exciting episodes lined up over the next 4 weeks. So please go to our Instagram handle, Talk to the Brand, and we'll be sharing out more details on when they're coming and how you can sign up. In addition, as I mentioned earlier, we also have some great episodes lined up for distribution, including Storytelling with Authenticity with MSNBC anchor Mariana Atencio, Navigating the EVP Journey with Mars's Kelly Barkowitz, How You Quantitatively Measure Culture with LinkedIn's own Head of Talent Analytics, David White, and Turning Employer Brand into Employee Engagement with some really funny food puns on the side with Marta Riggins and Rian Finnegan from Instacart. And there's even more. So once again, stay tuned to Talk to the Brand on Instagram for release dates. And until then, I'll catch you next time on Talk to the Brand. Thanks so much.